Okay, if that didn't get us demonetized, let's continue talking about Amazon's Invincible has taken the internet by storm. Fans of the original comic series, running from 2003 until 2018, knew it was brutal, emotional, and shocking, but somehow the show has managed to make the experience even more intense. Since its release, a question for new or old fans has arisen. Is the show better than the comics, or does it fail to live up to Robert Kirkman's original vision? What I want to do is outline the differences between the show and the comics. I absolutely refuse to go through every minute detail, like Seance Dog is actually Science Dog in the comics, or how one of the Mauler twins has a goatee and a piercing, which does make him look way cooler, by the way. I'm just going to focus on the characters and how their plot beats change the story. Let's start with our mustache Superman clone, Omni-Man. Okay, there is a lot to cover here. First of all, the original Guardians of the Globe aren't introduced until issue 7 of the comics. By this stage, Mark has been invincible for over 4 months. The Flaxen Invasion wasn't a Mark and Teen Team crossover, but an Omni-Man and Invincible team up. Just the order of the timeline is just a little bit different, but this isn't the jarring thing. The Guardians are killed off in the exact same issue that they are introduced, fairly late compared to the show, and they are killed off immediately after we're introduced to them, when they're assembling at their HQ. We don't get any more time with them like the opening scene of the show in front of the White House. We don't explore their dynamic with Omni-Man outside of spoken word, and the show ramps it up to 11. In the comics, they're killed by an unseen villain for only like 2 pages before it's revealed to be Omni-Man on the 3rd and final page. This does leave a bit more mystery as to if Omni-Man is evil or if the Guardians are, before all is properly revealed 4 issues later. In the show, well...
Oh no.
It's a bit more obvious that Omni-Man is positioned to be the one in the wrong here. Also, in the comic, the only reason Omni-Man is found out is because the Immortal is revived, and Omni-Man has to kill him in front of Mark. Very different from the show, where Cecil is actively investigating him. Damien Darkblood is actively investigating him. Debbie is actively investigating him.
Trust you? How could I possibly trust you now?
Because you know me.
There's a lot of things I thought I knew about you.
The main difference being, Omni-Man is prime suspect number 1 in the show, whereas in the comics, it almost feels like there is a possibility that he might have had heroic intentions. Now, this speaks to character changes outside of Omni-Man that add to the show, which I'll elaborate on when it's their turn. But when talking about Omni-Man, it does make his presence more of a villain role earlier in the show. I think establishing this early on is why they were able to make their next change so much more effective. In the show, after Nolan has beat the brakes off his son, which is a lot more brutal in the show, we have a beautiful montage of him reflecting on his betrayal of his family and of the planet he was slowly falling in love with. He then goes to the Thraxan homeworld and falls for Andressa, having little baby Oliver along on the way. Whereas in the comics, he only goes to Thraxa to conquer a new world after failing Earth and then falls for the planet. And who can blame him? In the comics, the Thraxans are way thicker. Awooga! I apologize. Comic Nolan's character growth does seem to be a bit more abrupt and happening mostly off screen. Whereas in the show, the tension slowly builds up surrounding Omni-Man's intentions, stretching his betrayal over multiple episodes. This allows for the reveal to hit much harder and allows for a deeper character exploration, especially when you see his relationship with Mark being that much more tragic and Nolan's internal struggle with his redemption. Next up, let's look at how Mark himself is changed over from the comics. In the comics, Mark quickly becomes an experienced hero, balancing his powers of school and his relationships a lot more smoothly. We do get a couple more villains for him to punch, so his issues seem to be a lot more external rather than the internal insecurities and failures we see within the show. But this highlights something else. He does seem a bit more chill with characters dying fairly early on. Now, he does have issue with almost killing Angstrom after their first battle, but in the comics he doesn't really dwell on it. For a lot of season 2 and 3, this is Mark's main struggle. In issue 4 of the comic, he confronts his physics teacher, David Hiles. David has been kidnapping kids after his own was bullied to the point of suicide. He is then strapping these kids with bombs and letting them loose. Pretty tragic. The man is obviously not well and has gone about things in the worst possible way, making him a villain who has personal stakes with Mark's own history. How does Mark respond? Well, Mr. Hiles embarrassed him in class earlier that day, so when it's revealed that Mr. Hiles has a bomb on himself and the countdown is ticking, Mark just flies him into the sky and throws him, allowing him to just blow up while chastising Hiles for embarrassing him in class and then complaining that all this flying is going to give him a heart attack. Could just be my take, but that is a pretty cold response, sort of more Omni-Man MO or Oliver coded rather than the Mark we know from the show. Even when he goes up against Doc Seismic in both the show and the comic, he attempts to save the villain. I can see why the show left David Hiles out. I mean, the very first panel of the first issue of Invincible is a flash forward to this confrontation, but his detached reaction to his former physics teacher turned terrorist would have made his later incredibly guilt-ridden reaction to a random scientist who almost killed his mother and little brother seem very out of place. And that seems to be a theme. Amazon Prime Mark just feels things more deeply. It's a much more understandable reaction to the traumatic events taking place, from his father killing a bunch of innocents, rolling over into how he interacts with him on Thraxa, into how he feels about killing Angstrom, and Oliver's inherited violence. All of this is given extra breath in the show, and the character that culminates all of Mark's guilt is Powerplex. As there isn't as much emotional development in the comics, Mark seems almost angry and like he doesn't feel sorry at all during their first interaction. He even goes as far as to call Powerplex a jerk in their confrontation during the cleanup after the Invincible War. Whereas in the show, the holding off of Powerplex by both Mark and Oliver showcase that the Grayson brothers are taking accountability for what their Viltrumite baggage brings to Earth. In the comics, he literally just hits him, calls him a jerk, and then gets someone else to hold him until he's all tuckered out. He only considers Powerplex's point of view after all of this, and in a private moment with Eve. Okay, a quick speed round through some of the side characters. Debbie, Mark's mother, is given a lot more time in the show. In the show, she has agency when it comes to suspecting her husband of killing the Guardians. We actually spend more time with her in her grief of Nolan's betrayal. Again, the character study is just more in depth. This is a bit of a simplification, but in the comics, she just seems like a bit of an alcoholic afterwards, and it's never really elaborated on until she starts to parent Oliver, which is a fairly one-note character development. Amber is reimagined as a more assertive and socially conscious individual. Again, another woman in Mark's life who has been given more agency in the show. I know she gets a lot of hate online, but to be 100% real to you guys, I rather Amazon Prime Amber. In the comics, Amber is such a boring girlfriend, and she ends up emotionally cheating on Mark with her next boyfriend. Amazon Amber has a real relationship with Mark, and yes, at times it's juvenile, but it's real. Moving on to Cecil. There is actually a bunch of differences, but I think what the show does well is that it explains where he is coming from a lot more often. We get more of his perspective, and the sonic weapon he develops for use against the Viltrumites actually has an origin in the show. In the comics, we don't have that Atlantic Screamer beast, and Cecil's team just develop it seemingly out of nowhere, whereas show Cecil actually learns and develops things to stop the Viltrumites. It makes his atomic fumble later on by keeping Conquest alive more warranted than in the comics, because you know this guy just tries everything. This one's a real quick one, but William. He is closeted for most of his appearances in the comics and even dates Eve at one point. I feel like we don't really need a closeted character in this day and age, so I'm happy that they just skipped all that. Comic book Shrinking Ray is gender swapped and dies in that scene where she's eaten by the villain Komodo Dragon. Also, he is sort of a jealous dick in the comics. I am much more excited to see how she now grieves our premature king, Rexplode. I'm still sad that Rex exploded. Now for the big one, the one everyone's talking about, Conquest. Conquest is done so much better in the show. For one, the brutality, as always, is just so much more visceral and expanded in the show. Maybe that's because of the format, but the comic is known to be very brutal itself. Actually, there are some scenes that are from the comics that I wish were panel for panel translated to the show that weren't. Like, their first showdown is just so iconic, and also the way Conquest stops in a cloud of dust when being begged by Mark to stop. But the show still takes the cake, just as the fight is so much more drawn out. Not only that, we also have a callback to the Nolan train scene with the new Conquest beach scene, now with Mark closing his eyes from the horror. Moments like that just add to this whole thing. Eve even has more to do, as in the comics she just rocks up, throws up one of her solid air shields, and immediately gets a hand through the stomach. I can't lie, I love seeing Eve throw some more creative moves into this fight, but all that's just dressing. The real difference narratively is Conquest's "I'm so lonely" speech. Something that does not even exist in the comics and has become an instant classic. This speech alone actually gives Conquest some character, whereas in the comics he's just a psycho Viltrumite. Yes, a great character, but really is just a grunt brute who is only a physical foil for Mark. With this speech, he becomes a symbol of the monsters that the toxic Viltrumite culture can create. Now, there is a glaring elephant in the room that I do have to address. Outside of the characterization and the plot, no adaptation is without its critiques. Both the Invincible comics and the show have faced scrutiny regarding their visual presentation. While the comics underwent a noticeable artistic shift, the show has been criticized for inconsistent animation quality. You can really tell where the budget goes, and it's to the amazing voice acting talent and maybe like 2 or 3 fight scenes a season, with some industry sources stating that an episode of Invincible costs about $10 million to create, when compared to Amazon's other properties like the $19.5 million per episode Fallout series or the whopping $58 million per episode Rings of Power show. You would think that maybe some of that can be shared around to a show that arguably brings in more fans than both of those shows. It's especially painful when you see another animated Amazon project, the show Pantheon, have a very similar art style, only it has consistently better animation. I mean, Invincible fans are used to quality upgrading. Just ask comic readers how much better Ryan Ottley's art is than the original Cory Walker's art. No shade to Cory Walker, but Ryan replaced him from issue 8 onwards, with Walker only returning rarely, and the quality is largely celebrated. So this is me begging Lex Luthor lookalike Jeff Bezos to please just pay these animators more. I've gone on and on about how the show excels. So, do I hate the comics? Absolutely not. They're different formats which allow for different ways to attack the story. The comics can elaborate on the universe in a lot of distinctive ways. For one, with no rights issues being in the way, the comics have a lot more crossover with other Image properties like the Brit being introduced much earlier, as well as Wolfman, and the actual inclusion of Savage Dragon and Spawn. We even have an honest-to-God Spider-Man crossover with Marvel, something that I'm so sad didn't properly happen in Season 2. We also have more villains, more adventures. So what the show sacrifices is a larger fleshed out universe, and instead it is hyper-focused on giving the immediate world around Mark more attention. I love what they've done with Omni-Man's betrayal and redemption, Mark's guilt over the ramifications of his heritage, the added agency both Amber and Debbie have, as well as the extra dimensions we get from Conquest. While personal preference will always play a role, the Invincible show stands as one of the best comic adaptations in recent years. By refining the narrative, expanding character arcs, and enhancing the emotional weight of the story, the show surpasses its source material in many ways. However, you could not have this expansion without the amazing work found within the comics laying that foundation. See, the reason this show has resonated with audiences in this way is very similar to why Image Comics, the publisher behind Invincible, started. A lot of people attribute it to the original artists wanting to move away from DC or Marvel for various reasons. One reason being the want to tell sequential stories that didn't require 100 jumping in points or restarting canons. Similar to how the show is a breath of fresh air for people who are just tired of whatever the multiverse saga is with Marvel and DC rebooting yet again. I was lucky enough to discover Invincible fairly early on in my comic reading career, probably being the second Image comic series I started outside of Spawn. And as much as I have said, hey, the show expands on some things in really great ways, in ways I prefer over the comics, I would be lying to myself if I said the comic book isn't spectacular writing. At only 144 very digestible issues, please treat yourself to reading the original. And if you want to pick up from where the show has left us off at the end of Season 3, we are currently at issue 66. Our editor will probably get rid of this, but I just want to let everyone know I know about Damien Darkblood and like all the new stuff there. I just didn't really want to include it because it's not really a pivotal character in my mind, and also the new storyline that sees at the end of Season 3 doesn't even happen in the comics. It's just something that Robert Kirkman wants to add in because he's wanted to for a while, but in the comics he just goes off to investigate the murder of the Guardians of the Galaxy and then just disappears from the story for ages. He comes back later and is like, I think Omni-Man did it, and some random lady's like, yeah, we already know, haven't you been watching the news? We know that. And then he disappears forever. So he's sort of like, he's a cool character. He's like a Hellboy pastiche, or like a Rorschach-y sort of Hellboy situation. But I mean, it's nothing. I'm excited to see what happens, but it's not like a before and after like what this video was. Anyway,
Are you sure?